Ice had been building on the Wind River since midnight, and the temperature outside Lander, Wyoming had dropped to 4 degrees by the time Sergeant First Class Lena Croft pulled her truck to the shoulder on Baldwin Creek Road at 7:15 on a Wednesday morning. In the back seat, Coda pressed his nose to the window. Then he did the thing he only did when something in the air had already answered a question Lena hadn't asked yet. He went to the door, sat down, and waited. Through the windshield, at the end of a long dirt drive, sat a tan ranch house with a front porch light still burning at 7 in the morning, and a figure in a coat standing on that porch with no hat, in 4 degrees, looking at nothing. What Coda found inside that house would prove that the story everyone in Fremont County had been told about Hank Dillard was not the story that was true. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, this is the kind of story we tell here. Stay with me. Lena Croft was 36 years old and had learned early that the world sorted itself, at critical moments, into the people who accepted the official version of things and the people who kept asking. She had been the second kind of person since she was 17 years old, the week her Uncle Warren died and left her the particular inheritance of men who serve. A sense that some things are worth doing even when nobody is watching, and a low tolerance for being told not to look closer. She had done 2 tours with the 82nd Airborne, military police, forward operating bases in Iraq and then Afghanistan, the specific education of a woman who learned to read a room for threat, to separate what was being said from what was true, to hold control in situations that were trying to come apart. She had been good at it. She had also learned, in 2 tours and a decade since, that the hardest thing about the work was not the threat itself, but the moment before it. The moment when you knew something was wrong, and everyone around you was still explaining it away. Her sister Danny had been fine, the doctors said, for a week in the spring 3 years ago when Danny was not fine. And Lena had accepted that because the doctors said it, and because accepting was easier than the alternative, and she had never fully forgiven herself for that week. She did not talk about it. It lived in her the way certain things live, not in the front of a person, but behind everything else, shaping it. She had come back to Lander because Fremont County was Warren's county, and because the search and rescue work needed people, and because, if she was being exact about it, she had been looking for a place where the work she knew how to do and the place she was supposed to be had some overlap. She had found it, mostly. She ran 2-person SAR callouts with Coda and did deputy shifts at the sheriff's office 3 days a week. And she was not entirely at rest, but she was useful, which was the next best thing. Coda was a black German shepherd, 71 pounds with a working dog's build, and a black so deep it read as charcoal in flat light and true black in the sun. He had served 4 years in active military police detection work, narcotics, trace explosives, pharmaceutical compounds, before a knee injury that had healed fully, but it ended his service eligibility. Lena had adopted him at a desk in a Fort Carson processing office, by signing her name on a form that was 2 pages long and had taken her approximately 45 seconds to read, because she had already decided. Coda had one behavior that no trainer had taught him, and that had taken Lena 8 months to understand. When he detected a specific category of pharmaceutical compounds, certain benzodiazepines, sedatives, overdose level concentrations, he did not do his trained sit-and-stare alert. He pressed his nose to the object and held it there, his whole head tilted down, his body still. It was subtle enough to miss if you didn't know what you were looking at. Lena had learned it by watching him at the VA clinic, where they did monthly volunteer visits, where once he had pressed his nose to a veteran's jacket pocket, and Lena had asked about the pills, and the veteran had started crying. She had not missed it since. The figure on the porch of the ranch house on Baldwin Creek Road was Hank Dillard. Lena knew Hank the way you know people in a county of 8,000. Not closely, but specifically. She knew he was a Korean War veteran, and a retired civil engineer who had designed irrigation infrastructure across 3 counties, and whose name was on a plaque at the County Water Authority's office because of it. She knew his wife Ruth had died 5 years ago. She knew his son Craig lived in Riverton and had been saying, at the diner and the hardware store and wherever Craig went, that his father was getting confused. She had heard that word, confused, 4 times in 2 months, about the same man. She had pulled over on Baldwin Creek Road because Hank was standing on his porch in 4 degrees without a hat, and because Coda was at the window, and because those 2 things together were enough. Hank Dillard came down the porch steps when he saw her, moving carefully over the ice with the deliberate gait of a man who had made his arrangements with the fact that the ground was no longer reliable, but had not surrendered his willingness to cross it. He was tall, slightly stooped, with white hair and a face that had the texture and economy of a man who had spent 60 years outdoors doing things that mattered. He looked at Coda, who had come out of the truck and sat at Lena's side. "Coda," Lena said. "He's friendly." "I know dogs," Hank said. His voice was clear. Not the careful, searching voice of a man feeling for words, just a voice. He reached down and let Coda sniff his hand, and Coda pressed his nose to Hank's palm for a moment, in a way that was not his pharmaceutical alert, but was something else. Recognition, almost. The specific acknowledgement the dog reserved for people who had spent their lives doing hard work outside. "You're out early," Lena said. Hank looked back at the house. Something moved across his face, a careful arrangement, the practiced neutral of a man who has been told, more than once, that his version of things is not reliable. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Anything wrong?" A pause. The pause of a man deciding how much of the official version to repeat. "Craig says I wander," Hank said. "At night." "I've been trying to prove I don't." Lena kept her expression steady. "Have you been?" He looked at her directly, the first direct look, the one that said, "I know what I know." "No." He said, "I haven't." "Then what's keeping you up?" He held that for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside." "It's cold." Coda went in first. The front room of Hank's house was a room that had been lived in fully and specifically for a long time, bookshelves covering 2 walls, an engineer's drafting table in the corner that still had papers on it, photographs on the mantel that spanned 6 decades in the way of a life that had accumulated things worth keeping. The smell was coffee and wood smoke, and a faint chemical smell underneath, the kind that registers at the edge of awareness before the brain has named it. Coda stopped in the center of the room. His nose went up. He turned his head toward the kitchen. He was not doing his full alert yet. He was doing the thing before the alert, the gathering, the confirmation, and Lena watched it the way she had learned to watch it, without interfering, without directing, without letting her own assessment get ahead of his. "I'll make coffee," Hank said, and went to the kitchen. Coda followed him. Lena followed Coda. The kitchen was tidy in the way of a man who had been tidy his whole life and had not stopped. On the counter by the sink was a prescription bottle, the label facing forward, a benzodiazepine for anxiety, prescribed by a Riverton physician, daily dosage printed clearly. Beside it was a weekly pill organizer, the kind with 7 labeled compartments, Monday through Sunday. Coda pressed his nose to the pill organizer. He held it there, his whole head tilted down. His body went still. Lena knew what she was looking at. She waited until Hank had his back to the counter filling the kettle, and then she reached across and opened Wednesday's compartment and looked at the pills inside. She did not touch them. She looked. The pills in the organizer were not the pills on the bottle. The pills in the bottle were small and white, the standard compressed tablet form of the medication on the label. The pills in Wednesday's compartment were yellow, oval, a different manufacturer's coating, a different shape, a different compound. She could not read the imprint from this distance. She did not need to. She needed a pharmacist, and she needed a chain of custody, and she needed Hank to not know what she had seen yet. Because the moment he knew, Vera would know, and the moment Vera knew, everything that needed to stay in place would move. She closed the compartment. She stood up. Hank turned around with the kettle. He looked at her. He looked at the pill organizer. His hand moved toward it, the reflexive reach of a man who has done the same thing every morning for 7 months. And then he stopped. His hand stayed beside the counter without touching anything. "Vera fills it," he said. His voice was careful. "Every Sunday." Lena looked at the pill organizer. She looked at Hank. "Does she stay while you take them?" A long pause. "She watches," he said. Lena nodded slowly. The way you nod when you are keeping something in your chest that needs to stay there for now. "Hank," she said, "tell me about the property line on the south parcel." He looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has asked exactly the right question. For a moment, something in his face opened. The specific relief of a person who has been trying to say something for a long time and has just been given the room. "They think I'm confused about it," he said. "Craig says I keep getting the easement wrong." He put the kettle down. He went to the drafting table in the front room, and Lena followed. And he pulled a rolled survey document from the stack with the sureness of a man who knows exactly where everything he has ever drawn is located. And he spread it on the table, and he put his finger on a line. "That easement has been there since 1971, he said. "I put it there. The county recorded it. Any sale of that parcel requires county commission approval because of the water rights attached to it." He looked at Lena. "That's not confusion. That's the law." Lena looked at the survey. She looked at his hands on the table. Steady. The hands of an engineer who had spent 50 years drawing things that needed to be exactly right. She thought about her Uncle Warren, who had come back from Korea in 1953 and spent the rest of his life doing useful things quietly, and who had said to her once, "The men who came back from Korea never talked about it. Not because it was too hard. Because nobody asked." She thought about the week she had believed the doctors about Donnie. "Nobody's confused," she said. "Have you ever known someone who was right about something, who knew exactly what was happening, but couldn't get anyone to believe them? Someone the people around them had decided was the unreliable one? If that person came to mind just now, type their name in the comments. They deserve to be remembered." She made 3 calls from her truck at the end of Hank's drive. The first was to the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, where she reached a deputy named Tom Ashford, who had been on the job for 20 years and who, when Lena described what she'd seen in the pill organizer, said, "I need you to document that properly. Can you get a pharmacist to do a visual ID on the compound?" The second call was to the county pharmacy in Lander. A woman named Elise, who had filled Hank's prescriptions for 11 years, and who asked Lena 2 questions, and then said, "Bring me a photograph of the pill. Just the pill, not the bottle, so there's no question about the chain of custody." The third call was to Pastor Nell Hansen at Grace Lutheran, who had been doing a monthly pastoral visit to Hank Dillard for 3 years. She was scheduled for this Thursday. Lena knew. She had seen it in the county seniors outreach calendar, which she checked weekly as part of her SAR coordination work. Lena asked if she could move it to today. Nell said, "I'll be there at 2. She sat in the truck and looked at the house. Coda put his chin on the center console. "I know," Lena said. The urgency device she had not yet mentioned to anyone was the thing she'd heard through the window of Hank's kitchen when she went back to say goodbye, Vera's voice. on the phone in the back of the house, saying Craig's name, and then, "The attorney has the paperwork ready." Thursday at 10. Once Craig signed the POA Thursday morning, every move Lena was about to make would be fighting uphill against a legal instrument. Today was Wednesday. She had one day. She called Tom Ashford back and said, "I need this fast." He said he'd make a call to the county attorney. She called Craig Dillard in Riverton and got voicemail. She left a message that was factual and careful, not accusatory. Because Craig was not the person she was building a case against. Craig was a son who had been managed, and she said his father was fine. And she asked Craig to call her before he signed anything tomorrow. Craig called back in 40 minutes. He was defensive at first, and then he was quiet. And then he asked 2 questions that told Lena he had already had, somewhere in the back of his mind, a door he had been choosing not to open. She told him to come to his father's house at 2 o'clock. If you were in Lena's position right now, one day, and a man's whole life in the balance, would you have kept going? Type yes or no in the comments. I read every one. Vera Stills arrived at the house at 1:45. She came in the front door with her key and her routine, and she came in the way of a person who had been the authority in that space for 7 months and had no reason yet to believe that it changed. She was in her early 40s, composed, with the particular confidence of a woman who had built a careful story and found, repeatedly, that careful stories hold. She found Hank in the front room. She found Lena Croft standing beside the drafting table. She found Coda on the floor at Lena's left, sitting the way he sat when he had already finished his assessment and was now simply waiting. She found Tom Ashford near the front door with his deputy's jacket on. She found Pastor Nell Hansen on the couch with her hands folded. She found Craig Dillard in the armchair by the window, and the expression on Craig's face told Vera something had shifted before she had calculated what. Vera looked at Lena. She looked at the room. She made the recalibration, the specific speed of a person who has done it before, and she said, with a warmth that was entirely practiced, "I didn't know we were having company." "We're not," Lena said. "We're having a conversation." Coda watched Vera from the floor. He was not growling. His ears were forward, his body still, his eyes tracking her movement with the professional attention of a dog who had made his determination and was now simply recording. Vera turned to Hank. She used the voice she had been using for 7 months, the gentle, slower voice of a person who has decided the listener needs things simplified. "Hank, honey, why don't you let me handle?" The growl began low. Coda did not bark. He did not move from his position. The sound that came from him was continuous and even, the tone of a judgment already rendered. The sound that Lena had learned meant the dog had seen past every layer of presentation to what was underneath. Vera stopped talking. Vera took 1 step toward Hank's chair. Coda moved, not fast, deliberate. He placed himself between Hank's chair and Vera with the precise economy of a dog who had done this in conditions far more serious than a ranch house kitchen. And he stayed there, and his weight was forward, and his eyes did not leave Vera Stills. Vera looked at the dog. She looked at Lena. She said, in the reasonable voice, the practiced voice, the voice that had worked for 7 months, "Hank has good days and bad days. This seems like a good day. That's wonderful. But the fact is that his condition, I know what day it is." 6 words. Hank said them without heat, without performance, without the careful arrangement of a man who has been living inside someone else's version of him. He said them the way a man states a fact he has been trying to state for 8 months and has finally been given a room in which to state it. He looked at Vera. "It's Wednesday," he said. "The 14th. The Wind River came up 2 feet last night because of the ice melt on the upper tributary, which means the Jensen diversion will need to be cleared before the weekend. I designed that diversion in 1978, and I know exactly what it does when the temperature changes." He paused. He looked at his son. "I know what day it is." Craig Dillard was very still in his chair. Tom Ashford stepped slightly away from the door. Pastor Nell looked at Vera with the patient expression of a woman who has been in rooms where truth has been withheld from people she loves, and who has learned to recognize the moment it can no longer be withheld. Lena said, "Tom has a photograph of the pills in Hank's Wednesday compartment. They don't match the prescription on the bottle. Elise at the county pharmacy has identified the compound. It's a sedative at approximately 3 times the standard anxiety dosage for a man Hank's age. Administered daily for several months at that level. The documented effects include disorientation, memory fog, and difficulty with word retrieval." She kept her voice at the same register it had been since she walked into that house at 7 in the morning. "Even, clean, no performance. Those are the effects everyone in this county has been calling confusion." Vera's hand at her side went very still. She looked at Craig. Craig was looking at the pill organizer on the kitchen counter, which Tom had photographed and bagged. He was looking at it the way a man looks at something he should have looked at months ago, but had not because someone he trusted had told him he didn't need to. "Craig," Vera said, "you know your dad. You know how." "Stop." Craig said it quietly. He was still looking at the pill organizer. He said it the way men say things they cannot unsay, the way a door closes. Coda watched Vera move toward the front door. He held his position between Hank and the room until the door had closed and her car had left the drive. Then he turned. He walked to Hank's chair, and he put his head on Hank's knee the way he did with the veterans at the VA clinic, fully and without reservation, and Hank put one hand on the top of his head and held it there. Craig crossed the room and crouched beside his father's chair, which was not an elegant thing to do and which was exactly right, and he said, low enough that the room gave it privacy, "Dad, I'm sorry." Hank looked at his son for a long moment. "I know," he said. Vera Stills was charged with elder abuse, criminal endangerment, and financial exploitation. The county attorney's office took the case the following Monday, citing the pharmacy identification, Tom Ashford's documentation, and a medical review that confirmed the compound's effects and the 7-month administration timeline. The POA signing was canceled Thursday morning. Craig Dillard retained an independent attorney and opened a formal review of every financial transaction on the joint account for the preceding 7 months. He moved back to Lander, not permanently, but regularly, every second weekend, and more, because some doors, once they've been closed, are worth the work of opening. The congregation at Grace Lutheran organized a meals rotation for Hank that November, which he accepted with less protest than he might have 6 months earlier, because Pastor Nell had told him on the drive back from the county attorney's office that accepting help was not the same as admitting weakness, and that she had known him for 20 years and had not once seen him confuse the two things before, and he should not start now. There are moments when the clearest mind in the room is the one everyone has decided not to listen to. Hank Dillard had been right about the easement, right about the pill organizer, right about the irrigation diversion on the Wind River, right about every single thing he had said for 8 months in a house where someone had made it their work to make sure he wasn't believed. A dog pressed his nose to a plastic compartment on a Wednesday morning, and the story broke open. Lena drove back to town that evening with Coda in the back seat and the bighorns dark and white against the last light. And she thought about her Uncle Warren, who had come home from Korea in 1953 and spent the rest of his life being useful in a county that needed useful people. She thought about a week 3 years ago, when she had believed the professionals. She thought about what it costs a person to be right about something and have no one believe them, and to keep being right anyway, and to wait. She thought, some people hold their ground without any help at all. They just need someone to eventually come and stand on it with them. This story is for everyone who has ever been the person in the room who knew something was wrong and couldn't get anyone to listen. And for every person who kept their ground anyway. Is there someone in your life who has been written off? A parent, a neighbor, a veteran whose clarity people have stopped trusting? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one, and this section fills up with people who deserved to be believed. Every story on this channel is about looking closer when the easy thing is to look away. If that means something to you, subscribe, so you're here for the next one. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.